Since we've had so much drama, I figured I would try to go back to a little bit of the roots of this channel where I talked about the First Amendment. I know I have a lot of new subscribers, and I appreciate you all. And I don't expect everybody to go back through the past videos that I've done to get these little nuggets of wisdom. And maybe I've learned a little bit more about the First Amendment, and maybe I'm able to express it a little bit better since I've had some time to dwell on it and make videos on it and knock it into my thick skull a little more. So I figure we go through the basics on how to figure out what kind of test you would use in a given situation. And the way the First Amendment works, I think this is the best way to set it up. First, you look to see if there is a content or a viewpoint restriction. This is a Perry Education Association. Let's scroll up so you can see it. Perry Educators Association versus Perry Education Association versus Perry Educators Association. I know it's confusing. It is a very popularly cited case. This, however, that we have highlighted right here is the test for content or viewpoint restrictions. Now, how do you figure out if something is a content restriction or a viewpoint restriction? Well, let's say that you go to Oklahoma and the state doesn't want the doctors to say anything positive about abortion. So if the state makes a law or a rule or a regulation that says doctors can't say anything positive about abortion, that's a viewpoint restriction. They're allowing doctors to talk about abortion, just not anything positive about it. So that's viewpoint. Now, if they say, well, you know what, the best way to handle this is just not allow doctors to talk about abortion at all. So it doesn't matter if you're for abortion, against abortion, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, pro-life, pro-choice. Doesn't matter what you call it. You can't talk about abortion if you're a doctor. That's content restriction. Doesn't matter which viewpoint you have. It's the content you can't talk about. So if there's content or viewpoint restrictions, or if you're just not allowed to talk at all, like Citizens United, that case is about corporations being allowed to speak. And yes, money is speech. So if the corporation is not allowed to spend money on advertising, political advertising, that's the state saying you can't speak on this issue. That's content. Politics. They're not saying you can't speak on this issue for Democrats. They're not saying you can't speak on this issue for Republicans. They're saying you can't speak on this issue. It's content regulation. Now, in order for content regulation to pass the constitutional test, it has to be a compelling state interest, and the regulation has to be narrowly drawn to achieve that compelling state interest. Now, the words are compelling is the most compelling interest. It's more than a significant interest. It's the highest level. So what could be a compelling state interest? Well, a compelling state interest would be like state secrets. You can't tell the Russians the nuclear launch codes. You just can't do it. Doesn't matter why, you can't do it. You can't disseminate pictures of top secret military installations. You just can't do it. It doesn't matter if you think they're cool. Doesn't matter if you think they're terrible. You just can't do it. The nuclear secrets, the top secret military secrets, those are compelling state interests. So that is a content or viewpoint restriction. That's how you deal with those. The next one is really easy. This is U.S. v. O'Brien. Boop. U.S. v. O'Brien. This is a conduct restriction. In U.S. v. O'Brien, the government had a law that said you can't destroy your draft card. They don't care how, they don't care why, you can't do it. You can't destroy your draft card. Well, O'Brien, he's got a real problem with the Vietnam War, and he wants to protest it. So he goes out and he burns his draft card. And he does it to make a point. He is engaging in speech. Well, the government or the judiciary is kind of hesitant to find that he actually is engaging in speech, but they call it alleged First Amendment freedoms. Now, when can the government regulate conduct that impacts speech? And the court held that a government regulation is sufficiently justified if it's within the constitutional power of the government. So if the government has the right to do it, and the government in this case had the right to, because they have the right to maintain and raise armies, they have the right to make people have draft cards. It has to further an important or substantial government interest. That's a step down below compelling. It's important or substantial, but it's not compelling. And the government interest has to be unrelated to the suppression of free expression. And it is. I mean, they're not saying you can't do this for speech. They're saying you just can't do this. And the incidental restriction on alleged First Amendment freedoms is no greater than is essential to the furtherance of that interest. Well, they're not saying that you can't make it into a paper airplane. They're not saying that you can't, hold it up and say that it's a terrible, terrible thing. They're just saying you can't destroy it or deface it. It's got to be legible. They got to be able to read it. That's how they draft you. So that's a conduct restriction. So we've done conduct, content, and viewpoint. The next place we go, we're going to go back to Perry, is if you're in a traditional public forum. Now, we've talked about traditional public forums a lot. You may remember Ed just did a video on it, and I'll link that in the description. He did a video on Hague v. CIO. That's the origin of the traditional public forum analysis. And in Hague v. CIO, they said streets and parks are traditional public forums. And obviously sidewalks and plazas would be in there too. Traditional public forums are places where people have traditionally gone to speak, to get up on their soapbox and shout about how terrible the government is, or how great they would be in the government, or how this religion is good or that religion is bad. Wherever people have gone to stand on their soapbox, or to walk up and down with signs, or to hand out literature or whatever, shout at the top of their lungs, that's a traditional public forum. And if you're not doing a conduct, content, or viewpoint restriction, how do you regulate what people do in a traditional public forum? Well, the answer is the government can do time, place, and manner restrictions. And they could do time, place, and manner restrictions as long as they're content neutral, so they can't be discriminating on content or viewpoint. And they have to be narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest. Not compelling, just a significant government interest. And they have to leave open ample alternative channels of communication. So let's think of some of these things. What could a time restriction be? If they said you can't shout on a street corner between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., that would be a time restriction. And, depending on the location, I mean, if it's in an industrial area where you're not going to be bugging anybody, no one's trying to sleep in an industrial area, maybe it wouldn't be reasonable. But maybe if it's on a street corner in a residential area where people have to sleep, maybe that would be a significant government interest. Allowing people to sleep in their homes is a significant government interest. And it has to be narrowly tailored. Not having people shout on the street corner is narrowly tailored. And there's plenty of ample alternative channels of communication open. You can hang flyers on doorknobs. You could send out mailers. You could walk up and down the street with a sign saying exactly what you wanted it to say. Maybe you could put up posters on street lamps, depending on whether or not those are allowable. So that's a time restriction. A place restriction would be like you can use amplified sound devices in the business district, but you can't do it in the residential district. Or you can, what are we doing? We're doing place right now. You can protest against an abortion clinic, but you can't do it within 50 feet of the driveway of the abortion clinic. That'd be a place restriction. Manner restriction. Manner would be, a real common one is solicitation. A prohibition on solicitation, like at an airport. You can hand out flyers. You can carry signs. You can do your little chants. But you can't solicit money from the other people. And if it is a significant government interest, and the government has found that in airports having people solicit travelers is something that they can narrowly tailor. It's a significant government interest in allowing people to move freely and not feel, obligated to go around these people or give them money, etc. And at least ample alternative channels open, because they could still hand out flyers and play their little tambourines and things like that. But what about in a non-public forum? You know how all these people say that they go into anywhere that is paid for by public funds? Well, the U.S. government, the judiciary, doesn't think so. Adderley v. Florida is the kind of seminal case on it. And the traditional language in Adderley v. Florida, I've been to it so many times you'd think I'd go right to it. And I don't, because that would be too simple. Footnotes. Here we go. The state, no less than a private owner of property, has the power to preserve the property under its control to the use for which it is lawfully dedicated. For this reason, there is no merit to the petitioner's argument that they had a constitutional right to stay on the property over the jail custodian's objections because, and they're quoting, "This area chosen for peaceful civil rights demonstration was not only reasonable but particularly appropriate." Such argument has as its major unarticulated premise the assumption that people who want to propagandize protests or views have a constitutional right to do so whenever and however and wherever they please. That concept of constitutional law was vigorously and forthrightly rejected in two of the cases petitioners rely on. We reject it again. The United States Constitution does not forbid a state to control the use of its own property for its own lawful, non-discriminatory purpose. All the state has to do is have it viewpoint neutral and reasonable. And they can do whatever they want on their own property. They can straight up, if you look at Greer v. Spock, you can't have political speech on an Air Force base. Was that an Air Force base? It was some sort of base, military base. So yeah, it's as long as it's not. So if the military base was allowing people to come in like who were promoting a Republican president, but not people who were advocating for a Democratic president, then that would be unacceptable. But they could flat out say nobody can come in here and talk about anything political. Just period. They could do that. That's allowable. Then we have limited public forums and designated public forums. Designated public forums and limited public forums are a little bit trickier. There's a couple different ways that the government can approach it. They can, if they designate a forum like an APEL, APEL, USV APEL, on Vandenberg Air Force Base, Vandenberg made a free speech zone. That's a designated public forum. You could say whatever you want as long as you say it within that designated area. Of course, they probably have time, place, and manner restrictions. And obviously they could have conduct restrictions. But it's essentially, it's treated as a traditional public forum. That little free speech area is treated as a traditional public forum. Now, the government can close it. They could close it up, take it away. So that's why it's a designated public forum. And there's also limited public forums where, like a school is a limited public forum. This is Lamb's Chapel v. Senator Morich's Union Free School District. A school district was allowing other groups to come in and have meetings and things like that. Like the Boy Scouts could come in, and Alcoholics Anonymous or something could come in. Other groups could use it. Now, the school didn't have to do that. The school can just close it all off. Nobody gets to come on. Only the kids can come in. Nobody else can use any of these areas for free speech. They could have done that, but they didn't. And because they didn't, then they couldn't discriminate. Although a speaker may be excluded from a non-public forum if he wishes to address a topic not encompassed within the purpose of the forum, or if he is not a member of the class of speakers for whom a special benefit the forum was created, the government violates the First Amendment when it denies access to a speaker solely to suppress the view or the point of view he espouses on an otherwise includable subject. So if the school opens itself up for clubs to come in, they can't reject people based on their viewpoint. Oh, you want to have a Christian club? No. Oh, you want to have a pro-gay club? No. You can't. They can't discriminate based on it. If they open it up to people to talk about things that are otherwise included, like if they have a club that, like the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts talks about religion. On my honor, I'll do my best to do my duty to God and my country. That's part of the Boy Scout motto or creed, I forget. But they're talking about God. So all of a sudden, you can't say, well, no, you can't talk about the Christian God or the Muslim God or the Jewish God or whatever other God, Hindu God, Buddhist God. No, you can't talk about that. Well, that would be a violation, because then the government is giving preference to some viewpoints and not others. So limited public forums get a little wonky. They could say who gets to speak. So on a limited public forum, like a school newspaper, they could say no, just the school kids get to speak. They could limit the content of that newspaper. They could say, no, you can't talk about this. This is a bit of an adult topic. Or the school. All right. So if the school allows someone to go up and give like the valedictorian speech, there was a case where they said, no, that you can't give this speech. It's too racy. It's too adult themed. And the school is allowed to do that. Schools are allowed to say you can't wear earrings if you're a boy or if you're a girl. You have to wear a school uniform. You can't wear a rag in your pocket, because we have the right to control it. It's got to be viewpoint neutral. It's got to be, and then it just kind of depends on the actual thing that they're trying to limit it to. I guess it's really more case specific. Other things like in the Southeastern promotion, this is where this group, the Southeastern Promotions, they wanted to put on a performance of the musical Hair. And they wanted to do it at a city, I think, owned theater. Yeah, it was a city auditorium. And the city auditorium said, no, you can't do it. But they did it because they didn't like the obscenity in Hair. I don't know what exactly is obscene about Hair. I've never seen it as far as I know. But apparently there's something obscene about the play Hair. Fine. Well, if the city had a set standard, they can't do it. Oh, this is obscene. If they had a set standard like, no nudity, they had a set standard that they didn't do it on a case-by-case basis, maybe it would have flown. If they had a set standard on when the theater would be open, like it's only open for these 3 months of the year, and we do our bookings from this time to this time, and it's first come first serve, and we don't care what content you put on, then it would have flown. But because the city made a decision based on the content of it, and they said we don't like obscenity, they can't do that. So it gets a little wonky in the limited public forum. Now, how does this all tie in to photography? Well, if somebody tries to outlaw photography just outright, that's probably not going to fly. That would be a conduct restriction, but it would also be a content restriction, because photography is not just an action, it is an expressive activity. So you could look at it as under the strict scrutiny analysis, and it would have to be a very compelling state interest, and it would have to be narrowly drawn to achieve that. So, how could that possibly happen? That would be hard. Let's say the government was going to move. Well, that would just be a time restriction. I can't see a way they could actually ever use the strict scrutiny analysis against photography. I don't think you could ever just make a ban against photography. If the government ever does come out and say citizens can't own or use cameras, then that would be a strict scrutiny analysis. It would be shot down, lickety-split. The courts would have none of it, and the government would have just wasted a bunch of time and money. Conduct is a little trickier. Why would the government, what kind of an important government interest could they have? Well, it would be related to the suppression of expression. So it would never be a conduct restriction. So we could just ignore this. So I wouldn't worry about this. But where you are going to see it is you're going to see it in the time, place, and manner restrictions. That's one place you're going to see it. If the government is let's say for whatever reason, the military is moving some sort of a top secret thing, and they don't want cameras because maybe the Soviets, or there's no Soviets anymore, maybe the Russians can figure out what the military is moving and the speed that they're moving it, etc., from cameras. So they're like, no cameras. Maybe, because it would be for a very limited time, in a very limited place. It would be for the time that this convoy was going by, and the place would be just the convoy route. And the manner would also be limited because you'd still be able to express yourself by shouting and hollering. So that wouldn't be I don't even know, I really don't know of a way that the government would ever be able to limit your right to use a camera in a traditional public forum. I'm going to actually put my neck out as far as to say that there isn't a way. Or if there is a way, it's going to be so arcane and unrealistic that you're just never going to see a time, place, or manner restriction in a traditional public forum. Now, if you're going to say, well, what if a band or a play gets put on in a park? Like in Sacramento, they have bands that come out and play in Cesar Chavez Park during the summer. But I really don't think that they could stop you from filming then. It's theoretically possible that if they're charging entrance fees, or if they convert that space to a limited public forum by closing it off and renting it out for the use of the band or something like that, then maybe. That'd be tough. But definitely where we can have and do see it is in the non-public forum. The non-public forum is going to continue to be a thorn in people's sides. A post office is a non-public forum. And we've seen Furry Potato, Monkey, Datman, James Freeman. We've seen all of them get popped filming in the post office. There's another guy. There was an Alaskan auditor who also got popped. I forget his name. He got trespassed from a post office up in Alaska. And I'm sure there are more. Post offices are non-public forums. You may have noticed the regulations that we've put out, that we've done videos on, that we've put out videos on. I've put out videos on them. Desert Sentinels put out videos on it. Ed's put down a very pedantic and dry video on it where he explains in great detail. You just can't film in a post office. Well, you can, as Desert Sentinel did. He asked very nicely, and the gal behind the counter gave him permission very nicely because he wasn't a jerk about it. But they can restrict filming. They can do it. It's a non-public forum. And remember, all it has to do is be viewpoint neutral and be reasonable. And reasonable is the lowest bar. Reasonable means that the plaintiff loses. Strict scrutiny, plaintiff wins. The rational basis test, or the test that they use for First Amendment analysis in non-public forums, it's almost a negligible hurdle. So if you remember in Greer v. Spock, they wanted to go door to door and hand out flyers in the neighborhood portion of the military base. That's all they wanted to do. And the court said, no, they've never allowed it. They don't want to deal with it, so they don't have to deal with it. That's it. That's it. So I have a sneaking suspicion that police stations aren't public forums. They're not streets or sidewalks or parks or plazas. Most government agencies aren't. Courts are certainly not. See U.S. v. Grace. You're not going to get too far necessarily in any of those places trying to film. Now, maybe you get away with it. Maybe they don't enforce the rules. It happens. Because at the end of the day, you're just filming. I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's not like you're in there with an axe or something swinging at people. So now that we've gone through all of those, and we've determined that probably the one that's going to get you is going to be the non-public forum, let me bring one other quick caveat into play. Never forget that every single state has a state constitution. And the big states, the states I've looked at, all have freedom of speech built into their constitution. And they're all going to have case law built around the state constitution's freedom of speech. You may have noticed that before the 14th Amendment, before the First Amendment applied to the states via the 14th Amendment, there was still freedom of speech in all these states. That's because state constitutions will typically have, I haven't seen any that don't, I'm not saying that there aren't any that don't, but they'll typically have either a free speech clause, or they'll have case law that kind of built in free speech as a common law premise. And for example, California's free speech clause is much broader than the First Amendment. The First Amendment is the floor, and the state can give you more protection above that. They can't give you less protection than what the First Amendment provides, but they can give you more. So, for example, in California, shopping malls are considered public forums. It's the Pruneyard decision. There are some limitations on that. There was a Supreme Court case that analyzed the due process clause, taking from the owners of these malls. Basically, it's a taking by saying that they can't regulate speech. So there are some limits on your speech at shopping malls, but you have actually some protections in California. carrying on First Amendment activities in shopping malls. Not in the stores, but in like the public areas of shopping malls. Additionally, in California, the parking lot of a prison was determined to be a public forum for the purpose of having a prisoners' union talk to the people going in and visiting with the prisoners. And one of the initial cases is called Inri something or the other, and I forget it. But it was where people went into a train station and they were handing out literature, again, protesting, I believe, the Vietnam War. And the test that California came up with is basically, is it causing any problems? Is it getting in anybody's way? And if it's not, then you could do it. So always remember that the First Amendment is the floor. It's the starting point. Your state constitution may provide you more protection. Check it out. Your local law library is going to be a great resource to, if you go to your annotated codes, like for California, it'd be the California Constitution annotated by like Deering or Westlaw. There might be others. You go to the section that has the free speech portion of your Constitution. You look it up. You find all the cases that define the limits of the state freedom of speech, and you might find that you have a lot more protection. If you're wondering why California auditors typically don't get trespassed from police stations or bus stations and things like that, is because California, and I also don't harp on them about it, California has a lot more protection for auditors than most other states, like Texas. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this enjoyable. There's going to be links to Ed's video on Hague v. CIO and Desert Sentinel's video on the post office. Feel free to check them out. Thank you for watching and have a great day.